Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Pirate Racing Club. We are sitting down with our friend and Total Motorsport journalist Ed Spencer to talk about the F1 testing and the 24 Hours of Le Mans entry list. Sit back, relax, and join the club. Hi Ed, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Florian. How are you?
I'm okay too. So, let's get right into it. After all the new cars are shown, who made the most good-looking car and who the worst?
Tough one because you can't really say any of them are ugly or any of them are, revolting to look at. I would say I quite like the look of the Red Bull. I think it's very much a slimmer version of the RB18, but I think the one that caught my eye the most was probably the Alpine. It looks very sleek, very much like how you want a Formula One car to look. And as someone who also saw it in person, I can assure you it does look the part. I don't think there was really any ugly cars. I think every car on the grid this year looks pretty good. I mean, Mercedes always have a car that stands out with the fact that W14 doesn't really have side pods, but no, I don't think there was anything revolting to look at.
Okay. Were there any teams that made radical and big changes to the car after last season? For example, Mercedes, since they had a shitty year last year.
I would say Red Bull have gone much slimmer, and I think a lot of teams have adopted their side pod concept, considering that the Mercedes one didn't really work. Red Bull one did, so a lot of teams I've noticed have copied it. There's also much slimmer noses, and it's more downwards rather than high, which some teams like Aston Martin were trialing last year. There's also like an occasional mini shark fins at the back of the hat. You have to really look closer to get it. I mean, you have to get a microscope to spot it. Not a great deal, but it seems like the cars are just more the evolution of last year's, but just much slimmer, and they've got rid of the concepts which didn't work, such as the high nose and the regular side pods. They've gone with two directions.
Given that Red Bull dominated last season, do they all look like the Red Bull car now, or did they persevere in following their own path like they did last year?
Well, they look much better than I think last year. Last year, all the talk was on Ferrari. This year, it seems to me that Red Bull go into the season opener as hot favourites, and in testing, they were just pretty much they were flying. Even on long runs, they were very quick, and I think it's going to be tough for the competition this weekend because Red Bull have just got everything right. One team that has really impressed me though, Aston Martin. Aston Martin have just been flying this in testing. I think even with the electronics issue they had on day one, things are looking really good, and now everyone is excited and everyone's thinking, you know, who can they challenge Red Bull? Ultimately, not. I think Red Bull are going to dominate this year. Don't know how many races they're going to win. I don't think it'll be as dominant as last year, but I think when you've got an aero penalty like they have, it was never going to be easy. It's never going to be easy.
hmm So to go on that topic, which team surprised you the most and why?
But Aston, I think everyone expected Aston to bring something good to the party. There'd been a lot of murmurings around with the aerodynamic side, and of course they've got a bit of a trump card, Fernando Alonso, who really takes over where Sebastian Vettel left off. And this year it seems the whole package itself is very, very good. Alfa Romeo, I think, are going under the radar though. Alfa Romeo had a good test, bar of course that one stoppage on day, I believe it was 3, with Bottas. They're really strong, and at the moment everyone is touting them to do well. I would say Haas are looking good, although there isn't as much hype as there was last year. But yeah, I think it's those two teams plus Haas, and you could even argue. I mean, you could even say maybe Ferrari look really strong again.
So it's gonna be a very tight competition, you think?
Yeah, I think it will be more tighter than usual, but I think at the moment we still should expect Red Bull to, pretty much have the edge.
hmm
Although, as we get back to Europe, things might change because this year the upgrades will probably be coming around Baku time. So teams will need to decide whether they go to whether they bring their packages to Azerbaijan or whether they'll wait a few weeks down the line to go to Imola. That's the thing that people should be looking at, is when and where the teams are going to make changes.
Okay, so what about Felipe Drugovich? He replaced Lance Stroll, and he will also be driving this weekend during the first race. Did he perform well? And will this opportunity help him for maybe securing a seat next year, which is of course
Well,
still far away since the season has to begin?
well, at the time of recording, we don't know if Felipe Drugovich will be in the second car, but the chances of him getting in are looking very good, considering that Lance Stroll has not been listed on the FIA press conference list. I think he did very well. I think he did everything that was required. Bearing in mind he hadn't tested the car, he kept out of the wall, put some consistent times in, did what was required of him, and he didn't disgrace himself. So, yeah, he deserves a go. And next year, of course, I think he could get a chance to drive it. And if he does well in Bahrain, that might improve his chances further. We saw what Stoffel van Dorn did after one drive in McLaren 2016. That one-off race effectively got him that drive in 2017. So, if Drugovich has another stormer, who knows? But yeah, I was very impressed with him. I really did feel that he did an excellent job.
So, what is the weirdest or funniest thing that happened during all these test days?
Fans complaining that it was boring. I think testing has a purpose, which is to test cars, not to entertain fans. If you want entertainment, then you can always go and watch a repeat. I understand that sometimes the same layout it's a bit tedious. Cyril, anyone for testing maybe 2024? But no, in all seriousness, I think that was hilarious, and I also think some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes, and the fact that we had the changing of commentaries, we also had the fact you had the real glamour of Formula One being incorporated, watching a bunch of Mercedes mechanics going into a Lexus saloon car, which looked like it had a few scrapes and bumps on the way to pick up the W14. So that was fairly humorous, although if you're a Mercedes fan, you'll probably be thinking this wasn't so funny. But testing's fairly routine. You don't really expect a great deal of magic and humour to happen. It's all very serious stuff.
Mm-hmm. The weirdest thing that I recall is that the nose of Ferrari dented in the high speed. Did they give any reason for that?
I think they mentioned it, but I think it was fairly standard. I think there was talk over the FIA looking at it, but nothing came of it.
Okay. So, you sat down with a lot of people to interview. What was the most interesting conversation you had?
Well, we all had conversations during pre-season tests, during the launches, and I think a lot of conversations that I had, there was a lot of talk with Fernando. Fernando came into the launch day and he sounded so confident, so optimistic. We know Alonso is a bit of a showman of a driver. We know he's a bit wild and a bit, he's almost like a heavyweight title fighter. He always promotes himself and always say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But this year he's genuinely confident that Aston were going to deliver him a good package. And so far, he's been proven right. Another thing that caught my eye was Pierre Gasly at the Alpine launch. He said to me that the shakedown of the A523 was the best he ever had. And when a driver is saying that that's the best shakedown he's ever had, something good is cooking. Even if Alpine, I feel, had a slightly disappointing test, even though there is, of course, murmurs around in the paddock that, hey, this car could be something.
Mm-hmm. So, we just talked about who was confident. Were there any people that started to doubt themselves between the teams or the drivers?
I think McLaren have had a bit of doubt, but they said it as early as the launch that this wasn't going to be, the car that we're going to use throughout the year, i.e. this was not going to be the standard package. They said as early as Baku that, they want to bring upgrades, and Norris, I think McLaren said itself that they weren't quite happy with with their package, so I think they seem fairly doubtful they can get a good result, but they seem to be the only team that really, I feel, are really not sure where they stand going into the first race. I think most teams know where they are, and then there's one or two which are thinking, okay, are we in the front four, are we in the mid pack, or are we at the back? But McLaren seemed fairly crystal clear that this was not going to be an amazing weekend, i.e. they weren't going to win the race by about a lap.
Hmm. After what we saw in testing, what are your predictions for the first race and in extent the whole season?
Well, I think 20 cars will line up on Sunday. I think that's the first prediction. That's going to be a good one. I think really the only thing I can see is Red Bull winning, but then afterwards it's fairly competitive. You've got Ferrari, and of course you've got Perez, and you've got Alonso as well. So I think Max will win on Sunday, but I also think that Perez will be second, Alonso third. Yes, I am on the hype train. I think everyone else is on that hype train, and the train is now leaving the station. I think this year we expect Verstappen to win. We expect Red Bull to be Constructors' Champions. Again, I still think they have the best package in Formula 1. But, you have to say, I think Ferrari will give them a run for their money. And I don't think this year we'll have a real golfing class. I think we'll see some teams struggle, but it will be fairly competitive, unlike last year, where you could clearly see who were at the front and who were the back.
So, moving on to endurance racing then. They released the entry list for the 24 Hours of Le Mans, 16 hypercars, 24 LMP2s, 21 GTEs, and one innovative car will be at the start. This makes a total of 62 cars, a very big field, but most exciting of all, a fully packed hypercar class. What do you think of that?
It's great news for the Le Mans, bearing in mind the last few years the top class has been populated by 5 or 6 LMP1 cars and then LMP2s. Now the tables have been turned. We've got 16 very, very good hypercars. And you could really make a case for all of them with a chance of winning. You could always point Toyota, Cadillac, Porsche, Ferrari. But then you look at Glickenhaus, you look at Vanwall, they've got a good chance as well. So it is very exciting for Le Mans, and it's going to make the 100th running so much more special, and it's only going to get better, bearing in mind Lamborghini are going to come next year. Acura might come, BMW. We may have 2024 hypercars lining up next year. So I feel it's only the start, but right now this is very good. This is just what we wanted. We've got a real proper fight on our hands for overall victory on Saturday and Sunday.
Exactly. Of course, we only know what we saw during Daytona. We don't know yet how everyone performs so far, but who do you think will fight for the win? It's the most prestigious race to win, so I suspect everyone will try to go that extra mile to try to win the race.
You've got to say Toyota are one of the favourites. I think with the record they have at the moment, they've dominated the hypercars so far. You've got to say that they are the favourites. Cadillac, though, will give them a good run for their money. They look strong at Daytona, and if they go well at Sebring, we used to say they can't challenge at Le Mans. Excuse me. Porsche, they've got a lot of miles in, they could do it. Ferrari, maybe even Glickenhaus. I mean, they have showed strong pace since 2021. And maybe you could make an argument for Peugeot, because Peugeot now got the reliability gremlins seemingly out of their system. So they'll have a chance. But really, you could almost say it's too close to call, which is very difficult. I can't remember a Le Mans where you turn around and you look at the entry list and think, oh god, this is pretty gulf the gap. It's very close. This is going to be very close.
Yeah, and that's very amazing. Do you think the struggling teams, such as Porsche, will have figured their problems out by 24 Hours of Le Mans?
Well, they've got a couple of races to really get their heads together, and that's also Sebring with the 12 hours and Spa, which is going to be very interesting to watch, because that's a real trial run before Le Mans. I think they'll get on top of it. They've had time to digest what happened at Daytona, and I think that Porsche will be on top of the issues that cost them the win in that race. I think the other teams you could say struggling, Peugeot, I think, as I've said, they will get on top of it. Cadillac had a few gremlins. I think they'll get on top of it. So I think I think the teams that race at Daytona will have time to really analyse the data, analyse where they went wrong, and really improve the cars before we go to Sebring in a couple of weeks' time.
Do you think there will be a difference in performance between the teams that also participate in IMSA and the teams that only participate in WEC, since the teams in IMSA have more race time so far then?
Yeah, I think IMSA will probably understand that. The IMSA teams will understand their cars a bit more because they've raced them more often. And, of course, they will have 2 grueling races under their belts, whilst the WEC teams only have 1. So that may give them an advantage. But it really depends on how practice goes for them. Bearing in mind you may have the best car in the world going into Le Mans, but if it doesn't perform, you're stuck at the back. This place is a real leveler per se, because it's not a permanent race circuit. So teams have to kind of guess what setup to go for, how to really attack the circuit. So on paper, the IMSA teams should perform a bit better, but of course, we won't know until qualifying.
Yeah, Le Mans stays Le Mans, of course. We see some exciting new names on the list, such as Van Wal with Jacques Villeneuve as one of their drivers. What are your thoughts on them?
It's very exciting, this Van Wal project. It's originally the Bicolis one, which were always competing in LMP1, but never really had the budget to perform. But now with Van Wal, they seem much better prepared. They've had a year under their belts of testing. And they've got Jacques Villeneuve, who is a very good sports car driver in himself. He was part of the Peugeot team. So this is definitely a team that I'm intrigued to watch because of the fact they've got an all-star lineup, they've got a good car, it seems on paper. But the question will be, will the lack of budget impact them? Because with the lack of testing and lack of development, they may struggle. But you look at that and you think, they look really solid.
We also see a few customer teams on the list. Hertz Team Jota, for example, with a Porsche, and Action Express Racing with a Cadillac. Do you think they will perform good, maybe even outperform their factory teams, or will they not have as much chances on winning races?
Well, Action Express will have a chance because they did fairly alright at Daytona, even though they had their little issue during the race. I think Hertz may be a little bit behind because they're getting their car. I would say, is it Sebring? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sebring, yeah.
They're gonna be a little bit behind, but Action Express should be in with a shot. Hertz Jota will depend on how they perform in the races running up to Le Mans. So that's the way I see it going at the moment. Naturally, it's still fairly early days.
Then let's talk about the innovative car. What is it and what's the purpose of it?
So the innovative car is a modified Chevrolet Camaro that they use in NASCAR. Now the reason why we are having a NASCAR at the moment is because we are on the 50th anniversary of the collaboration between Le Mans and NASCAR starting. Now in 1976 there were 2 NASCAR teams competing at Le Mans. 2 very small teams, and granted they didn't make the finish, but they made their mark. Now with the fact that we have the 50th anniversary, Hendrick Motorsports have been commissioned to make a modified Camaro for the race, and that means that unlike a regular NASCAR, it will have things such as a wiper, trivial things. But yeah, it's interesting, and I think from what I've heard, they got the pace of a GT3 car, which shows you that they're not just going to be there for photo shoots and a cool pit stop there and there. They're there to compete, and they will do fairly well. They've got a very good lineup with Mike Rockenfeller, Jimmy Johnson, and 2009 F1 World Champion Jensen Button, who is a huge asset, as well as Johnson.
So, as you said, this year the innovative car is a NASCAR. Hendrick Motorsport will be the team racing it. They are the only car, of course, and they don't have a class, so they have nothing to win or lose. But it is an endurance race, a very long one, which is completely out of the comfort zone of a NASCAR team. Do you think they will perform good?
Yes, I think, as I've said, they have the pace of a GT3 car, so they're not going to be miles off the pace. It's not going to be a question of or are they not going to qualify for the race? I think the only concern is the weight of the car. The car is probably going to be quite heavy for Le Mans standards, so they're going to be up against it on that side. And they're going to be up against it in traffic with the hypercars and the LMDH. But you can make an argument saying that the GTE cars are up against it with the traffic. But I think they'll do fairly well. I don't think they'll disgrace themselves.
Since they give this opportunity to a NASCAR, do you think in the future there will be a whole class purely made for NASCARs?
Tough one. I think NASCAR teams may decide to have, maybe have two entries maybe in 2024, depending how well it goes, because as we know, the NASCAR field is shortened to 40, so NASCAR may have an incentive to the small teams who may try and qualify for the Daytona 500 or won the other races, and say, we'll give you some money to go to Le Mans. That's what they did in the 70s, and I think they could easily do it again, but I don't see a category being dedicated to NASCAR. What I do see is for the innovative cars, we may have different types of car coming from different series, so maybe TCR, we may have a V8 supercar coming over, we may even have a rally car modified. You just never know. That's, I would say, the beauty of endurance racing. If you have a project and it's quick and you can modify it to make it go racing, you can bring it to Le Mans.
We see that Jenson Button will be one of the drivers for Hendrick Motorsport. What do you think this means for his career? Will he go race endurance? Will he go race NASCAR?
It's tough to say with Jenson. Jenson's very settled at the moment. I think for me, Jenson will probably use this as a one-off, and then he may come back next year if he enjoys it. I don't think he wants to race full-time because, he does have a life away from racing now, and you don't really want to get back into that routine when you're happily retired, you've got a family, you've got a life in Los Angeles. But if he has a go at Le Mans and he likes it, then yeah, I could see him make a few guest appearances, maybe even a go in the odd wet car there and then, but ultimately time will tell, per se.
If you could change one team on the list, who would it be?
That's very tough. That's very, very hard to say. Obviously, I would have liked to seen Acura come, because I think everyone would have liked to see them try and do the Triple Crown, which is Daytona 24 hours, Sebring 12 hours, and Le Mans. But of course, 2024 is still there. I would have liked to have seen Isotta Fasciacchini make onto the entry list, but they left it a little too late to get on it. And I would have liked to have seen maybe another Van Wall, perhaps. I would have liked to have seen them maybe have a go. Also, there was supposed to be a fourth Porsche, which I don't think is going to happen. It was Proton competition. I didn't see them on the entry list. So I would have liked to have seen them. Maybe even a couple of other GTE cars, but I think the field's fairly good. There's not a list of teams you think, why have they made it? I think it's a fairly good looking grid.
So besides that Acura is missing on the list, what other manufacturer do you miss on the list too? This can be a manufacturer that still has to come in, or is just not there.
Well, BMW ain't there in the hypercar category. They're there in the GTs, but they're not there in the prototype, which is a shame, but they obviously have a reason, which is that their car isn't quite ready to tackle Le Mans. Bearing in mind Daytona, they struggled a bit. Of course, Lambo aren't going to be there for another year, so we have to wait. And of course, Isotta just didn't make it. So those are the three big misses. But the good thing is, you can definitely say they'll be in with a chance again on the entry list in 2024.
So going back to Isotta Fraschini Milano, they revealed their hypercar, and in my opinion, they look good. Do you think they made a quick car?
Well, the proof will be in the pudding when they get testing. But on paper, it looks a very good looking car. It's very neat. It's very compact, which is a weird thing with like a top prototype car, because you expect it to be quite wide, but this is quite compact and it looks fairly light. You could even mistake it for an LMP3 car. That's not a criticism. That's just an observation. I think they will perform. I think they will surprise plenty of people, and there is a lot of support behind this project. But of course, with a privateer team, there is always that concern that the development might not be there. But we'll see. I'm fairly hopeful that they can produce something good.
Do you see them race this year? And yeah, do you think they will perform well if they race this year?
Well, they're not going to be at Le Mans. They're probably not going to be at Spa or Portimao. I think they should wait till Monza to run it, because it is going to be a fairly local race for them, bearing in mind they're based up the road from Monza. And, Monza is a fairly forgiving circuit. It's not forgiving on engines, but it's fairly forgiving on the chassis itself. So I think they'll do fairly well there, but of course they have, only 4 or 5 months to get a budget ready.
Will they have the same story as Glickenhaus, having not enough budget to participate in every race with even more than one car and to improve the car? Or will their story be a bit different?
That's a tough one, because Glickenhaus, it does have a decent budget, because Jim Glickenhaus is fairly wealthy. Isotta Fraschini, the thing is, you have to question, where is the level of investment? Where are the sponsors coming from? And I think there will be sponsors, because, the Italian motorsport industry is still very strong. But you have to question, how many sponsors will they get? How much budget will they get? You can have, let's say, 1.5 years as a privateer team where you don't have any sponsors on the car, but eventually that's going to catch up for you, and the project might tail off. So they have time, but yeah, I don't want them to become another Glickenhaus, but at the moment they need to start getting sponsors, even if it's like a minor one. Any sponsorship is better than no sponsorship.
That's very true. So, to round up our conversation, are you more excited for Formula One or for WEC this year, and why?
I would say I'm fairly excited now for both. It took me a little bit of time to get excited for F1, because it is more of a profession and more of a job. But I would say I am very excited for WEC. I think this is the first year since, I would say, the 2000s or even 1991 where sports car racing is the talk of the town. Everyone is talking about sports car racing. Everyone is excited. Everyone is hyped for what we've got this year. And, I definitely think it's going to be an interesting season ahead. And I think you'll get more fans in the grandstands. That's the thing as well. We will have more people interested in this series. I mean, you've got to look at also for the fact that F1 has created this microsphere where celebrities who are not normally racing people are coming into racing. Tom Brady today signed an agreement to sponsor Jota, which says a lot about the boom of racing in general. And yeah, I think this is going to be a fun year, and it's going to be one where people start to learn a lot more about WEC. So I don't think we'll see the Formula One size boom in WEC, but I definitely think we'll have 40, 50, 60, even 70% sellouts from nearly all the races, and then even the odd sellout there and then for Le Mans or Fuji or whichever race gets people interested.
It will definitely be an important year for the endurance racing, that's for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Ed, for joining us. Next time we will speak, we'll probably to talk about Sebring. Looking very much forward to discuss more racing with you.
Pleasure. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Thanks for joining Ed and me in this episode. If you want to follow Ed, you can find all his details in the description. If you want to keep up with the latest news of Pirate Racing Club, you can find all our information in the description. If there is anything you want to have discussed in our future episodes, or if you just have some questions for us, please do not hesitate to let us know. We are more than happy to hear from you. Thanks for joining the club, and see you next time.
See you later.